welcome again everyone, and for this special part of the club, which is the collector club. The bottles that are not easy to find. Fortunately, we are actually, starting to have really good relationship with winemakers, and they are keeping the wines for us in the cellar, and so we can reserve bottles that are already 7, 8, 10, sometimes even 15, 20 years old. But for sure in the future we will probably need to stop the subscription for the collectors, and so you're the lucky one that are into it. And I personally like this selection more than anyone else. We were able to create an incredible cultural biodiversity, and there are wine for every type of palate, and it will be nice to taste the wine one after the other and to see how different they are. They come from any possible region of Italy, trying to cover different grape varieties. My little baby, you are the lucky one to get this bottle. This is my last. I only have 2 bottles of SASSICAIA 98. Prices of this bottle are going crazy. I tried to buy in an auction and it arrived like 700 euros, 650 euro per bottle, and I couldn't make it. And I don't know if you want to bring this bottle to me next time, we can drink it together, but take care, share it with the one you really love. You have to love that person very much to appreciate this 98, which in my opinion is, I would guess this is possible with 1988, the best vintage of SASSICAIA ever. Mixed opinion about SASSICAIA. SASSICAIA is not always a good wine, it depends on the vintage, but in a little thing as well, in the good vintages, is absolutely incredible. Giacomo Takis was a genius. He passed away a few years ago, so he is still the one that made this 98, and this is the quintessential concept of Mediterranean on a Bordeaux style wine. I don't want to call it super Tuscan, you know that I don't like that way of describing wine, but this is the wine that created the name of super Tuscan. You know it more than I do, like what, in 1972. In this blind tasting, they called the wine Super Tuscan because of the fact that Tuscan wines were not so famous, and the journalist said, today I tried a wine that was not just a Super Tuscan, it was a Super Tuscan. But the idea behind the Super Tuscan is kind of vulgar. I repeated this thing hundreds of times because it's like, it was about copying the Bordeaux style wine. Sometimes in the late 80s, they started to copy the Napa Valley style wine that was copying Bordeaux, so it was a mistake made twice. SASSICAIA is far away from this concept. They don't really care what's happening outside on the marketing. And again, the 98 is beautiful, beautiful. What is the difference between 98 and SASSICAIA is the balsamic finish. It's refreshing. It's not too bold, less Napa, more Bordeaux, but with a huge hint of Mediterranean that makes this wine unique and easy to recognize in a blind taste. We're going to go now to this beautiful wine. It's called Perillo. We have another TAURASI Aglianico, and it will be nice if you want to open in one night the two, because this is the big producer and the small producer. Again, this is another special bottle that has been aged in the cellar and released from the winemaker only 3 months ago. So we're talking about a 2005, 18 years of an incredible wine that was kept there just for us. So you better like it, I would say. Perillo is a completely different story from Mastro Verardino, because we're talking about 3,000 bottles, 4,000 bottles to produce. Of this specific wine here, I think it's not more than 400 bottles. Think about the effort of a small winemaker that is able to keep these 300 bottles, 400 bottles in the cellar, not selling it, resisting to, people that want to buy it for more than 18 years. 18 years is a lot, it's almost a lifetime if you think about it. You would not, maybe when you start this project, you don't even know if you're going to see the end of it. And so I like it's moving how some of these winemakers are investing their time with a perception of time that is different from us. I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow night, and I freak out if they ask me to organize a holiday this summer. And these guys were actually planning their life for the next 17 years. Comparing to this one here, I would say that this will be slightly more richer and slightly a bit more tannic because of the youth of it, and also because of the structure. I don't know which one is better. This is not a challenge. It will be really nice for you to open both of the wines. I would say the pairing will be similar. Maybe we'll go this bit more pork chops and a wild boar, something with a bit more fat to compensate the tannins. But, two beautiful masterpieces. That is kind of an homage of Aglianico. Everyone is spoken about Aglianico, but not a lot of people knows exactly what Aglianico is. I know you can find this bottle almost in every supermarket nowadays, even if it is an expensive bottle. Well, the price could be from 120 to 250 euros, more or less, depends where you find it. And so does it make sense to put a Dom Perignon or a Krug in a selection? And of course, we already have it at home like this. You don't have to go down to the shop. But, you know, the idea is to think about how and why I select a certain kind of wine. So it would be nice to compare this one here and here, because they stay, both of them, 10 years in its own yeast. This is a blend of different grape varieties, of course. I give you a couple of tips also. All the technical information of this wine, there is an ID number. You go to the Krug site, you write the design ID number, and it tells you everything. And 169, and from 167, 168, and 169 Cuvée, I think the Krug went back, fortunately, to the older style. The older style is before Krug was bought by Louis Vuitton Moet Tennessee, in which, in my opinion, they started to change a bit the style, also due to the fact that they had a series of warm vintage like 2000 and 2003. And I don't know, the idea that Krug usually had like a slightly higher acidity was perceived to be a wine different. There is champagne, and then there is Krug, that's what we used to say. It is surely my favorite champagne, has always been, and it's a kind of an homage of it's actually my tradition in wine somehow. We're talking about a wine, Ric Lebel, which doesn't work with them anymore. I think this was the last Grand Cuvée he produced. He was absolutely a genius. He's still a genius. And the way they were actually selecting the Cuvée, they have more than 10 different vintages actually in this wine, blended together, the way they treat with the winemakers, and they control how all the grapes has been harvested and raised using the right amount of fertilizers and not too much chemicals on an organic side. And Krug is Krug, and there's no point for me to present a wine that is astonishing by itself. Eccolo qua, Vigna d'Alceo and Castello di Rampolla, and I presented this wine. This is not the first time I'm putting it. This is a different vintage. I've been putting in the wine club. Usually I put this one in a legend club because this is a 150 to 100 euro bottle, so it doesn't really fit the price of the collectors, but I wanted to be generous at this time. We made a deal with Maurizio di Napoli. I bought 90 bottles of this 2012, which was a beautiful warm vintage, and with wine that's got a nice rich fruit, and now it's developing beautiful tertial aromas. Here you have, I usually don't like jammy flavors in the wine. This is mainly because of maybe of the Petit Verdot that has got the Cabernet Petit Verdot. This is officially Super Tuscan. There is something that is so unique on the jammy flavor of this wine, because it's balanced by a nice acidity, and it's so warm on the palate without being flat. This is the first expensive wine I had in my life. Actually, San Marco, which is the lower version of a Vigna d'Alceo, not lower, it's a different type of wine of the same winery. I remember I was 17 years old. It's mainly because of this winery if I am here right now after 35 years. Because I had my epiphany that day. I couldn't believe that a wine could give you such an incredible emotion. I remember like it was yesterday. It was me, Maurizio di Napoli, and Giacomo Takis, which is the enologist of SASSICAIA. So we're talking about the wine that was made by the same producer of SASSICAIA, so not the last enologist in the world. And you know, SASSICAIA, if you don't, you will, but it's an important wine. We call it Super Tuscan, but I don't like to call it Super Tuscan, also because this is a Super Tuscan with a strong soil and a local touch, geolocalization, I would say. This is a wine that needs some rich food, in my opinion, something that could be I would say, not pork. I wouldn't say pork because pork is a bit too fat. Of course, a fillet steak is always a great choice, like tagliata or fiorentina would be ideal, which is this big T-bone steak that it's really difficult to find. It has to be a meat that stays a bit there. It means like 10, 15 days frollata, you know, in the proper fridge temperature. There are some butchers that you know, make this process for the meat. What a unique bottle. Valtellina, Nebbiolo. We're talking about the northern part of Lombardy, 1.5 hours north side of Milan, and with Possa, one of the steepest vineyards in the world, I would say for sure of Italy. And harvesting there is an extreme sport. Isabella Arturo Pelegatti Perego, I don't think need presentation. She became too famous in my opinion recently, and is incredible how her wine has been going on this curve. I remember like 15 years ago, nobody knew them. It was one of my favorite wines, and I could buy those wines like for $20. Now I have seen his reserve wines like for $300, $400 in wine list. I'm talking about Ultimi Raggi, Stella Eretica is slightly cheaper, but Buon Consiglio and so on. This time I wanted to give you something slightly different, because I already put Pipilla Regina before. But then I asked her if she could give me some, because she'd been putting on the side in 1999 a special reserve of Pettirosso, which is not the KRUG one, you know? It is a KRUG, but it's not the KRUG like the Buon Consiglio. So it's technically, this wine when it's younger is slightly cheaper, still expensive, slightly cheaper. But then she thought that there was a great potential in that vintage. 99 was an astonishing vintage in Valtellina. I also remember the 97 Roche Rosse, which was an incredible, still it is an incredible wine. So we're talking about, I call it the female version of the Barolo. Female in a sense of more elegance. Yeah, more elegance, I would stick there. And the wine is persistent, resilient, it's not loud, it doesn't shout. It's not a wine that shouts. It stays there it's able to convince you in a softer way. I don't want to sound sexist, or we can call female. You can call it the way you want, but it's a wine that if you want to understand what does it mean elegance without being bold, that's a perfect example. This goes with some raw meat perfectly. We'll go with some delicate prosciutto like jabugo, for example, like pata negra, a Spanish one. Usually, I don't like to match pata negra or Spanish black pork with Nebbiolo, because Nebbiolo is a bit tannic. But in this case, it's actually lower tanning, and it could be a perfect matching. And great privilege, because this bottle technically doesn't exist on the market. And now, I'm pretty sure you're going to start to say, what are you talking? Alessandro is putting an Amarone, is one of his collection. He always talk about his tasting, how bad Amarone is, how fake the Amarone is, and so on. I'm a bit more straight. Sometimes I have to shock you when you come to my tasting, because sometimes some one of you, it's not your fault, because I was exactly like you 10, 15, 10 or 30 years ago. I used to like wines that were rich and bold and sugary and fruity and bold and oaky. And then my palate slightly went to another direction. And Amarone was, is a wine made with raisins. So it is a typical wine that you like when you're a young palate and not expert palate. Maybe a palate that has been a bit ruined by soft drinks and cheap cocktails. And but actually, Amarone, I have to say that I had some incredible surprises with Amarone. We did a tasting with Bertani a few years ago. Remember tasting in 1967. And it's incredible how this wine that tastes like almost like a port wine, like sweet with raisins, after 20, 15, 10 years, start to get to a completely different curve. It gets more on balsamic, it gets more on the... It's like a port made with Barolo in a way. It goes on these more ethereal type of flavors and all the consistency. Also, we have to say that in the last decades, most of the